Hi there. I have talked about the different methods by which a Gnostic might align himself or herself to the divine, but I don't think I kind of laid it out very clearly before. So I wanted to kind of present a definitive guide. Um, I mean, not so that you kind of have to choose which one you're going to follow, because I think you're going to follow different methods throughout your life, and possibly more methods than I've presented here as well. I've just hopefully drawing your attention to the main categories. Um, Meditation, centering prayer, um, the whole method of Michael Keating. Um, very interesting work here. The idea of meditation, I think I'm right in saying, is to cultivate an objective, observing mind to the point where you are objectively observing your own self, self in the whole sense of the word, your thought processes, your emotions, your aspirations, your fears, the ground upon which you walk mentally and psychologically. Um, but I think one of the things I get about meditation in the Gnostic sense of the word meditation is that there's God awareness, and we already have God awareness, but then we have layers and layers and layers and layers of crazy stuff going on, of ego, of fear, um, and avarice and all the rest of it, and that prevents us, and our consciousness is out here, wrapped up in all this stuff. And all this stuff actually prevents us from gaining awareness of God. And chief among all this stuff, the chief architect of our failure to become aware of God, is fear, the big F word. And so basically, in a finite world is by definition finite, and if fear is part of the finite world, therefore fear must be finite. And but when you get into meditation, you're sort of looking into the abyss of fear, and believing falsely that it is an infinite quality, whereas fear is finite. And you sort of have to leap without a parachute, and you have to leap into the darkness and find the ground of the Anointed One, which is the rock on which the church of Gnosis will be built. And so the Anointed One, the Christ, you have to find the actual reality, the infinite reality behind all reality, which is infinite as opposed to the finiteness of fear. Although fear wants to make out to you that it is infinite, it is in fact not. And when you find the ground, when you leap off into find the peaceful calm of inner tranquility, then you can begin to discover the finiteness of all the emotions, all your psychological baggage, the psychological clouds, if you will, that keep you from seeing the spiritual sun. And that's what, as far as I can tell, meditation is about. Of course, it takes many years, because first of all, you have to become an independent, objective observer of yourself without distraction, and that takes many years of practice. And then, of course, as I understand it, a lot of psychological baggage, including fear, will emerge and will swell up inside you. And it's through these various layers of darkness and layers of pitch and layers of fear and horror, and the memories of childhood trauma, etc., well up, and you have to go through these layers until you find the rock upon which the church is built, upon which Christ stands. And when you have found that, there is no more fear, because you reach the bottom of it. You've reached the end of it, and you've touched. Then you can touch infinity after that, which is pretty nice, apparently. Sit Sat Ananda, pure consciousness, pure being, pure bliss. And these are the fruits of meditation, as far as I understand it. Personally, I've always found it very difficult to meditate. I've got attention disorder syndrome, I think, and I find it very difficult to be calm and collected, and to calm myself and to collect myself. I mean, I'm trying it at the moment. Well, not trying it, but following a pattern. But it's very difficult even for me to follow a practice pattern. I can't practice the keyboard, so I'm quite unlikely to be able to practice meditation because I just haven't got the self-discipline to do it. And then I also think that the big con, perhaps, of meditation is basically the fact it does require so much self-discipline. And I also think that, I think perhaps our psychological problems are our cross to bear. And but I understand that meditation, the idea is to really invite Jesus Christ to carry the cross for you, and to deliver you from the powers of darkness and the powers of this world. So I suppose that there is a power greater than yourself which is going to carry the cross for you, or at least part of the way anyway. But I think perhaps to Calvary we all go, and we all do have to carry the cross at least some of the way. And we have to face each individual crucifixion on Golgotha. So anyway, so again, there is a dark night of the soul to go through in order to reach the light beyond. So meditation is extremely powerful, and I have known people, I'm afraid to say, who wanted to do a crash course on meditation, and they took various mind-altering drugs, and they were high and stoned and drunk, and they did meditation for an hour, and then they had a complete nervous breakdown. So that's where meditation gets its bad rap. Some people say it's very dangerous. And even people that say meditation is brilliant say you have to have a guru, a teacher, or you have to do meditation in a group, especially if you're going to do it for an hour long, or even 20 minutes long, because doing it on your own with problems that you already have or problems that you didn't know you had, you might get very disorientated and confused and might have realities crashing into war with each other within your mind, and not be able to kind of say, not be able to discern truth from falsehood, and you might start start listening to all the voices of fear that start whispering nonsense to you. So meditation can be pretty risky, I think, anyway, and that's probably why I'm not very good at it, because I fear the things that meditation will bring out. One thing I do find myself doing myself, and is introspection. This is where you create narratives and you create thoughts of your own. You have inspiration and insight, which wells up within your own being, within your own life situation, within your own experience and learning. Now, the big con with this that I found is that, of course, it starts to boost your ego. That's one thing, and then you start getting very attached to the thoughts and ideas that are boosting your ego. And when people critique your ideas, you then get very miffy about it, because they're criticizing what you then feel to be part of you, and you get sort of a bit kind of unable to cope, let us say, with criticism altogether. because it's all bound up with your ego and with your self kind of, with your self image, I suppose. That would be the idea of that. So then I go to contemplation, and contemplation is better because contemplation is when you're actually looking at other people's ideas, right? And you're contemplating Holy Scripture, and that's kind of nice to do. You're applying the Scripture to your own life situation, but you're also analysing it from many different points of view and aspects. And I suppose the big con with that, though, is that you could get a little bit too attached to dogma, and you sort of are unable to see other points of view because you're so engrossed in the one point of view that you've decided to study or to contemplate. So I suppose you have to contemplate everything in context and also with a view within the context of the universal mind, which is non-dogmatic. And I think that's very important. So contemplation is a good thing to do, contemplation, and I find it very soothing and inspiring to contemplate other people's stuff, as it were, far more than because I do contemplate my own stuff, but I've noticed that with introspection, I put up all the stuff on YouTube, all my own thoughts, but it's like heal thyself. I don't apply them to my own self, you see. Whereas I might apply stuff I contemplate from other people's pens, but from my own pen, it's like, oh, well, I'll put it up on YouTube and then I'll forget all about it. So it's got to like do as I say, not do what I do. Do you know what I mean? So I become a big old charlatan or a big YouTuber spouting off about stuff they only half know about and pretending they know all of it, which is impossible anyway. So then some people align themselves to spirit by use of crystals, talismans, things like that, sigils which are actually created on gold or parchment or something like that. Um, some people like that kind of thing. They're very visual orientated and they like art and like sculpture and they like crystals and they like woodwork and metalwork and they like creating their own sigils and talismans, by their own craftsmanship, which is brilliant if you can do that. In fact, that's a really, really good way of doing it, actually. Don't get other people to do it for you. And some people can find stuff in thrift shops, and they can align themselves to spirit through very very ordinary things or things that they see significance in, but which are perhaps just sort of bric-a-brac or and again you're giving money to charity and you're not spending hundreds of euros on stuff that you can buy on the internet. And I also don't like crystals because the way that they take crystals, they rip them from the bowels of the earth, and slave labor usually gets them out, and they're usually ethically very dodgy crystals. So I don't really have much to do with them now, although I've got a sort of collection of them. And anyway, you have to get into the whole lore of crystal magic and crystal energy, and you can become very captured and enraptured by all the superstition and all this quasi science associated with crystals, and you can get really really bogged down with all that. But I think some people, if they create their own talismans by their own hand, by their own creativity, I think that's brilliant. And we've done, and then so the final one is prayer, of course. Prayer is very, very powerful, but it says in the Mahanirvana Tantra that you should always understand and have analyzed the prayer or the mantra before you use it. So that when you've got a mantra, a bija mantra, which is a seed mantra, you should understand the Vedic passages from which that mantra has arisen, if possible. If you're going to use, if you're going to use the rosary, you should understand what the role of Mary is in Christian theology. You should understand, what grace means. Full of grace. What does that mean? And you need to know about all these things before you start chanting them repeatedly, because otherwise it just becomes an automatic thing to do. It becomes a sort of mind control thing. You've got to do your rosary or I'll hit you. You've got to do your rosary when you understand what the rosary means, and then you take that meaning to a different level of energy as a result of reciting it. But you've got to know what the words mean, not just to you, but within the context of the religious paradigm you're doing a particular prayer in. You see. And that's important. You can't just say the Lord's Prayer. You've got to know what the Lord's Prayer is on about, basically. That's important, I think. It's just not just doing a mindless chant of some energy. And also, I heard a very disturbing thing, that somebody in America taught somebody a mantram, and the mantram they told her they told her the meaning of it, but the meaning was false. And so right there, you see, you're entering into untruth. And if you teach people something which isn't true, and they're reciting it endlessly, for hours at a time, then this is not good. I think that there will be repercussions as a result of this untruth that's being generated by this mantram, the meaning of which has been falsely given to somebody. So I think you've got to be quite careful about that. And of course they meant well, because they just thought, well, all religions say the same thing, which all religions don't, you see. Religions say different things at different times for different reasons to different people. And you've got to celebrate the diversity of religion and respect the diversity of religion, and not just sort of say, oh, well, it's all the same. That's being very disingenuous, to great wisdom and great Gnostic power as well, disingenuous to the many colours and hues of Gnosis which occur throughout the world. So don't fall for that one. Anyway, so the point about these cons and pros, I mean, I haven't actually done many of the pros. Obviously, the pro of prayer is the power of repetition. And the pros attached to talismans and crystals, talismans, is creativity and working with metals and metal and stone and wood and things like that, which comes from your creative power. Introspection, is where you are spiritually creative, and contemplation, of course, stands on its own as contemplating what words of wisdom from other sources apart from your own subconscious, which is good to do, and which is essential, in fact. And also, I think, is a good process of stripping away your ego as well, making yourself humble with respect to what other people say, and listening to what other people say, and reading carefully what other people have written. That's very important, something which we don't nowadays do very much of. We don't read stuff properly, and then we just jump to conclusions. And people are doing that on the internet all the time, and it's a very, very insidious, bad habit to get into. When you miscomprehend what people say, and then misunderstandings occur, and then there's conflict where there shouldn't be conflict, and that's a pity. So I've been through the cons a bit more than the pros, but I think with the cons, you've got to be aware of the cons. Number one. Number two, you've got to make best use of the drawbacks of each method, work with them and not against them. And of course, you've got to make the best use of all the pros that you can. So if something's working for you, then make best use of it and push on with that method. Until results come, and that's always a good idea. And to a degree, of course, you're going to do lots of different methods and follow different methods, but basically you shouldn't keep jumping from one thing to another. You should sort of stick to one thing for as much as you possibly can anyway, or you should have one thing which is your primary method, and then you have secondary methods sort of coming in the background. As I say, I've covered this ground before, but I rather like covering this ground because I think it's nice to sort of be aware of all the options that you have at your disposal for attaining spiritual awareness. either directly or by having some means of getting all your psychological baggage out of the way, so that you can see the sun, so that the clouds, you can part the clouds and see the sun behind them, and methods which take away your which strip you of your ego and your preconceptions and your prejudices and all your psychological baggage, basically. These are methods that are very good to pursue, provided that there is a proper framework for you to pursue them in. But if some of these things, if you try on your own, you're going to get lost. I submit, very quickly, and you're going to have a lot of problems, worsening of problems, rather than problems going away. So you better off. I mean, contemplation is good for most people. I think. I mean, talismans and crystals and all that is only very specialist, really, for people that are very practical minded. Introspection is okay, but provided you don't get too attached to your ideas. And prayer and everything, and prayer and mantras, they're very, very good, provided that you know what it is that you're reciting and memorizing, and that it isn't just sort of the mindless chatterings of a baboon, which you're turning yourself into. And meditation is very good, of course, but it takes years to practice. It's a thing to perfect, like everything else, except if you're really like a lazy person like me who can't be bothered to practice, and who just wants to get there by the fast track, which of course is an extremely perilous thing to want to do. Perilous to want to do it, and perilous to do it, in fact. And not recommended whatsoever, and especially not the use of drugs whilst you're meditating, or that's madness, absolute madness. You don't go down that path, but unfortunately, a lot of people do, and that's what gets meditation a bad rap, I think, really. And so people say, "Well, I'm only doing Buddhist mindfulness, so that's okay." Well, I've known people to come off the rails doing Buddhist mindfulness as well. These things are not toys. They're not just to be done, like Ouija boards. I mean, they're not toys. All right, don't treat them like they're toys. Treat them with respect. Treat all these methods with respect, and admit when you don't know something, and then start doing your research before you actually pursue kind of a method. And certainly, if you're going to put all your eggs in one basket, then you certainly should do a lot of research before you do that. Before research the basket into which you're putting all your eggs. So I say all this, but I wish I did all this. I mean, this presentation arises out of introspection, which I can do very quickly. But then, you've got to put your money where your mouth is. You know what I mean? You've got to not talk shop, but actually do it. You know what I mean? Roll up your sleeves and get into following a method which is going to get you to where you want to go, or to make you aware of where you already are.